Don't know if my microphone's picking up the low-flying chopper. Just flew overhead.
No.
Anyway, I'm doing my part for being in Prague.
It's too early here.
It's 1:30 a.m. here. It's way too early.
Yeah. Or way too late.
Yeah. All right, according to the clock, it is time. So welcome everybody to Calext in Prague, virtually. So of course we always start with the note well, which I imagine everyone here has read by now, but this is basically the instructions to behave yourself and to tell us if you know of anything, any intellectual property that affects this work, and otherwise be nice to each other. We're good at that already. This is the rough agenda that I've put forward for the hour that we have. So I don't know how accurately we'll stick to these timings. There's no particular need to stick accurately to these timings. Better off just spending the time on what we want to spend the time on. Does anybody have any agenda bashing before we get into it? Anything else you want to discuss?
I'm wondering if Francesca and Barry wants to say something.
Well, sure. I'll say thank you all for the work you've done and for the support you've given me as AD. And I'm happy to turn over the AD job to Francesca for this working group. I think you'll enjoy working with Francesca.
Cool. Welcome,
Well,
Francesca.
thank you, Barry, for.
All right, let's dig straight in then. JS calendar, it's in Auth 48 at the moment. The mapping document's still being worked on, and there are specific slides. So I'm going to switch to those now. And I guess Robert and Neil and Mike, whoever wants to speak.
I can speak, or Neil, do you want to present?
You go ahead, Robert. I'll just jump if I need to.
Okay, cool. Okay, so JS calendar. We're talking about two RFCs here. One is the core document, the Calext JS calendar. The other one is the JS calendar iCalendar, which is concerned with defining how to map between iCalendar and JS calendar. Next slide, please. So for JS calendar, the JS calendar document, yeah, as Paul said, we are in Auth 48. We got IESG review. So we are as good as done. For the JS calendar iCalendar document, we are in a more early stage. We made sure that that Ken and I cover the iCalendar to JS calendar mapping before this session, because we came to the conclusion that this is having a clean mapping from iCalendar to JS calendar is important to us for giving JS calendar the final go. We reached consensus on almost all points already, but there are 2 points that are still open, and so we want to squash them now as fast as possible. Yeah, for the other direction, for JS calendar to iCalendar mapping, this will take considerably longer, I guess at least half a year or so. We'll have to define new iCalendar properties, and this is going to be more work. But for now, the mapping from iCalendar is more important to us. Next slide, please. So it says sharing events. It's really about scheduling. This is one of the 2 points where I have the feeling we do not have consensus reached for JS calendar, and I think we should. And then whatever decision we come up with now should be the final goal for JS Calendar. The thing is, while working on the iCalendar, the JS Calendar document, we came to realize that there is not necessarily a clean mapping between iCalendar, the way iCalendar attendees are defined, and JS Calendar. In JS Calendar, a participant can have multiple methods to reach that participant for scheduling requests, whereas in iCalendar you have one calendar user address, which is the value of the property, and then optionally an email parameter that Apple introduced a while ago, because they are using calendar addresses, user addresses that are not usable for IMAP internally. And we now have the thing that we can't clearly map between these two formats, because if we map an iCalendar to a JS calendar and then someone changes the send to method entries, probably giving them more than one entry, we won't be able to identify which one to use as the calendar user address in iCalendar. This is the one issue. The other issue is that in iCalendar, the calendar user address is used to cross-reference between attendees. For example, if you have delegates. In JS Calendar, we have this. We are using participant IDs to do this, which basically, where we can basically achieve the same, but it will require us to include, for example, multiple participants when we send an ITIP response with JS Calendar, because, and this again is a difference to iCalendar, because in iCalendar, if you reply as an attendee, you're only allowed to have exactly one attendee in the ITIP response. In JS Calendar, we will now have to allow multiple participants. So we will have to figure out which one of these is the attendee and which one did we just include to have a clean mapping to the delegates, for example. So we think we should address this. One of the options that we came up with was to define a calendar user address property in JS Calendar, which has a clean bidirectional mapping between the iCalendar property value of an attendee or organizer and the JS Calendar participant. But that's one, but not necessarily the only solution to these two gaps that we identified. So we are wondering, probably Neil, you had thoughts on this I saw on the mailing list. Probably someone else might share their opinions.
On the main list, I don't like the idea of adding this calendar as property. I think we could add a UID property if we want to be able to have these dangly references, essentially be able to say it's delegated from this person, but we're not going to tell you anything about this person in this event. If you know who that UID resolves to, then you might know who it was delegated from. I'm not a particularly huge fan of that anyway, because I think that's a bit weird. But yeah, we could have some kind of UID property, and then we map that in some way. But otherwise, as I said, I think the send to does map. If you're mapping from iCalendar, there will only be one value. If you have multi values, well, that's because you're using features that aren't currently available in iCalendar. So it's just richer.
Well, not necessarily, right? I mean, if we get and we have already seen calendar events in iCalendar from Apple, where there is a, for us, meaningless URI in the property value. So if that would be the only send to value, then basically but there would be an
That's-
email
yeah.
parameter under property, then we would have two entries in the send to.
Yep.
One
Yeah, and
other,
that's where
No,
the
because that email value is not an IMIP destination, so that would just be the email property on the JS calendar as well. It would not be in the send to, as Cyrus made clear.
No, he made that clear. Yet I got that event into my calendar, or at least I got it to where I could display it, because it was sent as an IMIP attachment using the email parameter value. I mean, whatever
It sounded what
he's
you're saying, and that was a bug in.
No, what he said was the bug was the format of the calendar user address, because it's not actually a valid URI. It's missing the scheme. But the point is that what was sent to me using my Thunderbird client was an event with a calendar user address that was a in parentheses invalid URI that's not a mail to, and he used the email parameter value as the destination of the IMIP message. There was no attendee in there that referenced me with a calendar user address of a mail to. So Apple's practice at the moment is to send you something where the email parameter is the actual IMIP address you're using. And I don't.
That's not what the actual spec says. It's not what the author of the spec says. And if that's what's happening, then there's clearly a.
Yeah,
that seems more like a bug rather than something to, try to bend ourselves in knots to support.
I agree with Neil on this one. I think Cyrus made it clear that the email parameter was basically for Apple internal use, and the fact that it escaped into the wild was a mistake.
No, he said
it's a useful thing, but the point is its definition is exactly the same as the email property in JS Calendar already is, which is this is an email address if you would like to contact this person and send them an email. It is not the same as this is where you send scheduling messages. That is what the send to for, which can be a mail to param, which may even be the same email address, but it's for a different context, and the same as what the calendar address is if you use a mail to URI there.
That's not how the discussions went at the time. This isn't something that, whatever his recollection of this is, at the time it happened, there was a lot of pushback from other people saying, why have you suddenly switched to using this email parameter and given us a value that we can't use? And it was more of a reaction from Wilfredo, but that was basically the thing was, well, that's the way it has to be, and they explained why, sort of. But it wasn't something that just escaped into the wild. It's what they did, and we had to follow.
Well, yeah, those UIDs shouldn't be appearing on the attendees when they go out on the wire. They should just be internally within Apple and then get translated at the edge. So the question is whether they're still sending those, or whether that was a bug where they were temporarily not.
Oh, that example is what I sent about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
I generated that with my Mac at the time. It wasn't something from the past.
Using which calendar server?
Probably Apple's.
Yeah, but running like just the open source one running on locally?
No, I using my Mac with my Apple calendar on it, and I created an event in Apple's iCal, and then
you're still
added me.
But
I'm assuming
which
iCloud
calendar
server.
Yes, the iCloud server.
iCloud server, which is not the same at all as that's a different server code base entirely, as my understanding. That's not the internal one. To
the open source.
Apple Calendar server, which is the open source one, which is what's run for the internal corporate calendar.
The open source one, is no longer. In fact, they completely written internally. I think they. So no, that example was generated at the time I sent the message.
We need to interoperate with iCloud. Otherwise,
that is the current. That's the current state of affairs, not something that comes out of anything else. And in fact, it doesn't even correspond to Cyrus's examples.
They're trying to make compatibility with something that's not following existing specs is always fun. But okay, we can try and find more examples of that and see what's going on. And But yeah, what should be happening is, yes, the calendar, anything seen externally, the calendar address is the IMIP value, is the mail to value, which I mean, I guess
Go on, sorry.
yeah. Well, I was just thinking, I guess perhaps what you were with your test, what you were seeing was not an external thing. It was because it was not the result of the ITIP message being sent. You were exporting the copy of the event from your CalDAV.
No,
is that right?
I exported. I sent it to myself via an email address because one of the problems I've always had with looking at the internal form of Apple's events is there's no easy export from iCal. So what I do is I use one of my other email addresses as an attendee. So I sent it to one of my other email addresses, and then I picked that up from Thunderbird. So yeah, it's going IMIP.
All right, perhaps you can give us instructions to try and reproduce some work.
And I also sent
have a look further.
One to Ken around the same time because there was I was trying to verify that this invalid URN value that they were using in the calendar user address actually was what they were sending. I don't know whether you looked at that, but it's pretty easy to verify.
By the way, I now also recall that actually the email parameter was not necessarily should be used for IMIP, or I got that wrong before. But nevertheless, and even irrespective, I think, of the specific Apple example, we want the JS calendar, iCalendar RFC to be a standard, and we wanted it, and it's so important to get scheduling right in both formats to interop, that we need to define a standard way how a participant should map to an attendee, including their property value. And the moment we have two entries in the send to, we don't want clients to come up with different mappings, because then it breaks all apart as long as iCalendar is still around it. I guess it will be for a long time.
Yeah.
So we need to define some standard mapping, and
I think that's straightforward enough. If there's an IMIP value, use that one as the calendar value in iCalendar, because that's likely to be the one they understand. If not, pick anyone, because no one's going to understand anything else. Like you can't end up with this from going from iCalendar to JS Calendar. So you're starting from a richer JS Calendar one and coming backwards.
Yes, correct. But you might change the JS Calendar and change that back to iCalendar.
So I like, if there are multiple, almost certainly, yes, the IMIP one, if there was an IMIP one in there, is the one that should go into the iCalendar as the value. Just take that.
Yeah, and if everyone agrees, that's the same decision, assuming that there is at least one mail to URI in the send to, of course, or one IMIP method. I'm just saying that if we would have one specific property, be that UID or calendar user address or whatever, it would be totally clear which one to use in the mapping.
All right, I'm just going to share a thing, because this will make it.
Oh, can I just raise a quick point here about whether this should be appearing or not appearing? Cyrus, in his first message about the email parameter, says the server actually does write the email parameter. He actually implies that this goes out in the message that's sent out.
Yeah, the email parameter does.
Yeah. Well, the value that's in there. The only reason for the email parameter is because the value isn't a mail to.
This is an email that I just sent myself from iCloud right now, logging into the iCloud web interface and sending it. And you can see that the attendee has a as not your proper URI, and
Yep.
the organizer has a mail to address at imip.me.com with a matching
Yes,
email
because the
equals
only
wrong at
one
wrong.
that you would be sending back to is the organizer, presumably.
Yes, which is
Yeah.
that mail to address, and then the attendee is me. So I see rubbish in like non-understandable things in these other fields, but the only ones that I need to care about are the attendee, that is me, and the organizer.
Yep. So
Apart from the fact that
those would both map to a single a send to with a single component. In the organizer's case, it would be IMIP mail to, and in the attendee case, it would be an other. Here's a URI. We don't know how you would route to this. That would
Yep.
map cleanly and round trip back again as well.
cool.
Okay, so but if you add an IMIP now to the JS participant, we would convert it back to an iCalendar attendee with a different value than the one with the rubbish. And things
Sure,
like that,
but
right?
that's not an edit operation you're really allowed to do as an attendee. You're just sending back to the organizer. Like if you're sending this back via iCalendar, like that, like yeah, I don't think that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, fair
Yeah, if
enough.
you're replying via iCalendar, you won't include that attendee at all, will you? Or via IMIP. You'll only include your own attendee and the organizer in your response.
Yeah, but I meant if you as the attendee, you would include your own attendee when replying. So you need to.
Yeah, but your own attendee doesn't have that Apple stuff in it. Only the other attendees have that Apple stuff in it.
My attendee had that stuff in it.
The one you were
Okay.
sending to, your Thunderbird attendee, or only your Apple attendee? Because the Apple attendee who's you on Apple, Thunderbird doesn't care what their address is.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry. Yes.
Yep.
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 Yeah.
So in that
So,
case,
yeah,
it doesn't
so you
matter
can't
because you're
edit
never
those.
routing to that. You can't edit them and you can't send to them.
But yeah.
So Neil, can you repeat what you think the mapping should be so I can capture it for the minutes?
Yes. So you're always mapping the value to the calendar address value to the send to property, and if it's a mail to URI, then we're presuming that's IMIP, and so that maps to the IMIP. And if it's just random other URI, then it maps just to other as the type in the send to, because there is no way how to route to that. It's essentially an opaque token.
Right, and we also need to define that using JS Calendar with ITIP, one is not allowed to change the send to of the participant is replying.
Well, if they're sending back JS Calendar, they could, but that I think saying ITIP with JS Calendar is too broad a thing. There's kind of two different scenarios here. You could be just doing ITIP with iCalendar, which is more likely, and you're doing JS Calendar translation just from the server down to a client. That's fine. Or sorry, it's very late here and I'm not being very good.
Yeah, I get what you mean. So it's about JS, using JS Calendar as a payload in ITIP. That's what I meant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is presumably the aim of all this. That
yeah, there's an upgrade goal here, and the whole point of of Send2 being multi-value is being able to one of the ways of being able to get us past just having IMIP everywhere and be able to get to something a bit better.
But
if
that's
you're sending
still,
back,
that's still going to leave ITIP underneath it, because ITIP is not the transport mechanism. It's simply the way
yes,
you
yes,
respond.
I agree. We're eating to a lot of time here, and this might be better done on main list where we can like write in more detail rather than go here. But yeah, I mean, okay, I going back to the original question of this, I stick by. I think there is a good translation. We don't need to add an extra property.
Yep, that's fair enough. I think the only point that we need to get at for JS Calendar is that we know that it, of all the consequences for the remaining mapping and ITIP stuff, we don't need to wait for all these RFCs, but we need to be sure that we found the same approach that works for all.
Yeah, let's confirm it on the main list. Like put the scenarios there, but I think.
Just a quick point about this that was touched on is the values of the delegated to, from, sent by, and all the rest of it. The sent by actually was one of the things which triggered me off into doing this, because on our spam calls we've been talking about these scenarios that have occurred with people who send stuff on behalf of somebody else, and they're doing that in an environment where they have multiple email domains because it was a merged company, and then of course you factor in DKIM and everything goes to hell, and so send by became a real issue. So we need to ensure that those parameters work, and I think send by, having a participant ID is actually a more complicated way of dealing with it. If we can fix on what actually the calendar user address is, then that could be the value of the sent by as it is in iCalendar, and you don't need to add extra participants to.
I mean, I have to go back. I thought sent by was just the email address of the person that sent it. Is it not? I have to go check.
Well, yeah, but it sort of has the same issues as delegated to and from. You delegate to, you delegate to an IMIP, an email address, a mail to, and at some future point, that message appears with an attendee, with a delegated from and a mail to value. So that they all have some of the same.
Just as a quick note, I think we are already almost at half an hour.
Yeah, we're well over time. We should move on. Was there anything else in the slides here? There's still 3 more slides.
Yeah, but this is the only other interesting thing. So as for mapping between JS Calendar and iCalendar for attendees, we also found a few gaps for recurring events. One is with R dates, where in iCalendar it's clear that an R date is an R date in addition to whatever the R rules are producing. In JS Calendar it is not. So this might come into play when changing the R rule. Firstly, because if you change the recurrence rule, you will have to figure out if what state is an R date and what really could go into the recurrence rule. But it also means that if the intention was of an R date, regardless of the recurrence rule, you have to figure out. We can't currently tell if we should preserve these as R dates when an R rule changes.
This is, I mean, you'll change the R rule. That's just from the client to deal with. No, I don't think there's an issue. I mean, 2 things here. Firstly, R date could coincide with the recurrence rule already in iCalendar. There's nothing that says it has to be a date that doesn't get generated by the R rule. And the other thing is just the
Yeah, so
No,
the
it's
specific
gone.
case, Neil, that I think we'd need to consider here is suppose that you have a meeting that occurs, on the first Monday of every month, and then you explicitly say, and we're definitely going to meet on the third Tuesday in this month because this is an important date to meet, and you add that as an R date in the system and maybe even put some overrides into it, and then you change the R rule to say, actually, we're just going to make this meeting the third Tuesday of the month every time, and then you go, actually, no, we're going to change it back. Does that recurrence disappear because it existed or not? How do you know which recurrence overrides to remove?
I mean, that's
I
entirely up to the
guess,
client, and that's the same whether you're doing it with iCalendar or JS Calendar. Like, I don't really think this
yeah,
makes
actually,
it doesn't express
if
a lot of semantic intent here.
if it's an override, then it's an override, and you're right, because it would in iCalendar it would already exist as a separate full
Yeah.
instance of the calendar event, and so it would be retained even if you change the R rule. So as soon as you override anything, you're immediately instantiating it as a full recurrence.
Yes.
But I guess the idea is if you create a blank R date, so it's a recurrence that has nothing, but there's something happening at this date, then does that get retained when you change the R rule? And I think the answer is yes, you always retain them.
I mean, it's entirely up to the client because the client is changing the R rule, and so what it should do with the rest of the event is, going to be dependent on the context. I don't think that's the concern of the spec at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just whether you tag them with something saying that this was explicitly created or not. But I guess, yep.
Cool.
It's much for muchness.
And the other thing, I think this was already discussed on the mailing list, is about standalone events. Standalone recurrence instances of an event on the previous slide. So the question was there that with the standalone recurrence instance, you don't know the time zone of the main event. Which means you also don't have for iCalendar the necessary time zone that was of the main event, and which makes up the complete value of the recurrence ID in iCalendar. So the thought was that to add a recurrence ID time zone property, which only is allowed to be set if the event has a recurrence ID. So if it's really a recurrence instance.
Yeah, I think we could do this. I think the property should be defined in the iCalendar JS Calendar translation document, because the only time you would use it is when translating iCalendar into JS Calendar to ensure that can be round tripped. If you're receiving in JS Calendar in the first place, then
I'm with Mike here.
It's how to the recurrence ID is not an opaque object. It's a date time. And it needs to be possible to convert that date time into things like UTC. It's indexed and it's searched for. It takes part in all sorts of things when you're doing time range searches. We can't just treat it as an opaque object. So to convert it correctly and use it correctly, we have to have its time zone. That was the point where things, and so even if you don't have the master event, you have no idea whether what the real time of that recurrence ID is. So you can't do things like check to see whether this falls inside the time range, even though the thing has been overridden, so it's outside the time range, which is part of the searches we do. That was the issue. And I think we should just have this, and we put it in there. Every time you have a standalone override instance of an event, you add a recurrence ID, time zone to it. It's simple, and it allows us to do what we're doing now.
Would you make it? You only include it if it's different to the actual time zone. So you only when it's actually.
In theory, you could. I'd be inclined to say just put it in anyway, because people will miss it if they don't. But yes, you could. You could optimize a little bit by not having it.
I guess the question here is, do you just have a property called time zone in the recurrence in that case? Is
No,
it
we
different?
already have that. That's the
We
issue.
already have that.
Is that
That's
Yep.
we already have that. The issue is if that doesn't match the time zone of the master event. If it does match the time of the master event, then we don't care.
and you could call it
No.
master time zone. If rather than recurrence ID time zone. But recurrence ID time zone is fine. I'm not.
Yeah, recurrence ID time zone is fine. I'm too tired to give more of an opinion on this right now. That sounds probably okay. If probably.
So maybe I missed the problem, but do we have a time zone into any single occurrence, or is that not specified yet?
The issue turns up because the recurrence IDs are date time objects. Like there's a whole bunch of date time things. There are values. There's DT start, DT end. But the recurrence IDs are time zone, a real time. And when you do time range searches, you're actually searching for recurrence IDs as well as all the DT starts and things, because where the problem occurs here is you might be invited to a single instance of an event, and the time zone of that instance might have been shifted. So you express the DT start in say you've got meetings in New York, and you're using America, New York as your time zone for the master event, and then we'll have one meeting in London, and you change the time zones and the DT start. But you can't without in iCalendar. You have the time zone is explicitly set on the recurrence ID, so you don't. That's not a problem. In JS Calendar, there isn't an explicit time zone ID for the recurrence ID. It's just the recurrence ID of the start location and the end location. So we need a third time zone ID, which is the recurrence
If we just
ID.
delay this until TC39's date time is done, then we'll have date times that have time zones in them, and we could use them as the keys.
No, stop it, Rob. I guess why I'm a bit puzzled is you said you want the time zone for querying, but if you aren't invited to the master and you're only invited to this recurrence ID, why I wouldn't expect the query to look at the time range query to look at the recurrence ID at all, just look at the start times of the particular instances.
You do queries on these things to see whether an instance of the event has been moved outside of the time. Maybe you're saying, what meetings have I got this week? And it gets flagged as saying this has been moved into the following week. But it would never even show up in the response to the query, so the client can't notify you that, by the way, this meeting's been moved.
Was that the old copy?
That was one of the reasons for searching on time zone on recurrence IDs. There's a whole bunch of reasons why the time range query has got all that complication to it.
All right, we've only got 20 minutes left for everything, so I think this one's going to have to go to the list as well. It's clearly not definite. And ITIP, and then next steps will go to the list.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. All right. Thank you. Let's plow on. Back at these slides, the next thing was VLARM extensions, which is this one here. Ken.
Yeah, not much to say about this. Real quick, next slide, let's go through the changes since the last IETF. We found out that the alternate extensible, quote, extensible syntax for defining VLARMs wasn't quite as extensible as we thought, so that was fixed. Following the changes in the event pub spec, we had removed the structure location property and replaced that with VLocation subcomponent for proximity alarms. And due to some confusion during the IESG reviews, I reorganized and hopefully clarified the process of snoozing an alarm and added an example showing what components are getting added and what properties are being changed. After all that was done, it is now in the RFC editor queue, so we are done. Thanks to Cyrus for writing the original document. Thanks to all the contributions from everybody in the group here. Oh, and thanks to Barry for helping me get 2 revisions posted during the blackout period to move this thing along.
Awesome. All right, next slide was Event Pub. There's questions from expert review and a discuss from Ben Kaduk.
The one question I have on this one is, am I supposed to, what am I going to do about the ABNF for one thing? Because the tide seems to have shifted. Do I put it back to the 5545 format? Does it matter? And should I resubmit with a new version?
Well, I would say you can resubmit.
And what about the ABNF? For the point of view of somebody who uses the stuff, I'm not too concerned whether it matches the 5545 formats. I'm more concerned that it that it's understandable and you can.
Barry, what do you have
Yeah,
to say?
this is Barry. As the one who pushed that change and then had to agree that this isn't the right time to do the change, I'm of a mixed mind on this document because it's a pretty small amount of ABNF. So if you want to leave it with the changed version, that's fine.
Yep.
On the other
That'd be
hand,
okay
it
by
would
me.
be the only calendar related one that's different from the 5545 syntax. So I'm happy either way. Like I said, I was the one who pushed the change, and I've been convinced that this is the wrong place and time to do it. So your judgment on this.
Let me take a look again, and maybe I can quickly come up with the because there were some bugs in it originally anyway. But let me see if I can come up with a more 5545. I actually so prefer the form we ended up with. So
do I, which is why I was pushing it. And like I said, if you want to leave that in this document, that's fine because it's not a lot of ABNF. But when we tried to do that in the other document where there was a lot more ABNF involved, it just got out of hand, and we decided it was a bad idea. So I'm okay if you leave changes in this one.
All right, maybe I'll leave it. I'll repost with the change.
I agree that the new ABMNF is certainly preferable, but as Barry said, having gone through this with VLARMs, I'll make it a task for myself to look at what you've got, Mike, and make sure that it actually does what we think it does. Because for the longest time, we thought that the VLARM syntax that Cyrus had come up with was actually extensible, and it was not. So I'll review what you've got to make sure it's not doing something strange.
Okay, that'd be helpful.
Cool. And the discuss from Ben Kaduk, is everything resolved there? Do we need to keep working on that?
What was Ben's discuss? Do you recall? Do you have it in front of you?
Let me just pull up the email thread again here.
I
So his
recall
last response
replying-
from 8 days ago was question was twofold and purposefully claim it's equivalent. We should mention that in the document in order to reassure readers there are no hidden changes. Have we validated it's already equivalent? Overarching considerations, we shouldn't put false statements in the document, and that's all ABNF questions.
That was referring
And the rest
to
sounded
VLARM.
good. Yep.
His discuss.
Yep.
So I think
Oh
we're
yeah,
okay
sorry. No,
on
that is VLARM. Yes, you're right. I searched for event pub extensions, but that was VLARM. My apologies.
And it says Ken as well, so that's a sort of clue.
Yep. All good. All right, are we done with event pub?
I think so.
iCal relations. That's just waiting for me to press submit. I believe there's nothing left to do on that other than the question of do we need to add JS calendar mappings for that? Will that go in the JS calendar mapping doc? Do we need to add anything to JS calendar for it?
My recollection is I think they're partially there, so maybe it would just make sense to make sure they're all there. it should be easier to then say it. And it's just a matter of adding values, essentially.
At some point, we're going to have to add a JS calendar section to all our
Yeah.
iCalendar changes to say, here's
Yes.
what happens with JS calendar. Cool. All right. So what do we want to do for this, Mike? Should you and I just chat about what's involved there? Do you want to look at JS
Yeah.
calendar? Do you want someone else to look at it?
I'll have a quick look at JS calendar and see where we are in relation to that. And yeah, we can do it over email.
Cool. All right. Series. These were the actions we had last time for it.
I did add them to iCal4j. At least my version I have, and I once it's a little further on, I'll try to get that into the Ben Fortuna's version. And I think I updated the draft, didn't I?
Yeah, probably.
I'd have to look.
I had a read through this document today. I have quite a lot of concerns and things I want to talk about it, but I don't think we've got time here. Calext probably a better place to do. So it's still quite early stage, right?
All right, so we discuss this at next CalConnect then?
Yes, we can add it to.
So when is CalConnect happening? The month.
Second week of April. Yeah,
Okay.
about a month.
Okay. So after that discussion, we will be able to decide whether it's a working group last call or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Server-side subscriptions. So it was going to try and sync up to what Apple have deployed.
Yeah, I don't think we've got any further with it.
Cool. Subscription upgrade, and I was going to do a working group last call on that, and I suspect that I should just do that. So it looks like, yeah, the last series draft was posted in October last year, so you haven't done a new draft since then.
Okay, I can do.
Since last meeting. Subscription upgrade, you did do a new draft just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
It was posted in February. All right. So I guess I should do a working group last call on that. That's what we expected to do at this point, so I'll do that straight after, well, not immediately after this meeting, but this week. And finally, VPOL.
I think probably still stands there as it is.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't remember whether I resubmitted.
That was last submitted in October as well.
Yes, so that, I have done updates with participant. I'll try and get that submitted as a soon. I think it's just waiting to go. I can submit that fairly quickly, and I have
Cool.
updated iCal4j for the new form, but I haven't implemented it in my server.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be
Yes,
too
I think
hard.
implementation experience will be the next step for that, and hopefully some interop again.
Yep.
But
This is
do we
on
need to
the
clarify?
Cloud Connect agenda as well, right? People.
It's a permanent item on the
Permanent
VPOL.
item, yeah.
It's usually somebody
I
turns up that wants to talk about VPOL, so we take it off, and then somebody says, "I'd like to talk about VPOL," so we put it back again.
yeah,
VPOL
I'll read
and
this
recurrence-
carefully again before then. Right.
VPOL and recurrence instances always show up on an agenda someplace.
He must be nearly 10 years old now. I remember it being interop tested at my first ever CalConnect back in 2014 or so.
Yes, it probably is fairly old.
I'm wondering regarding GS Calendar, how much the discussion with the calendar user ID is affecting the viewpoll GS Calendar section.
Only as much as it's the calendar user ID is the target for the way you send stuff. VPOL uses standard ITIP to send something.
Okay.
Well, it uses ITIP with some extensions in that it has some new methods because you want to indicate that it's a response to it's a new vote coming in or something of that kind. So there are a few new methods in the thing, but it's basically standard ITIP. So yeah, anything there will affect it to some extent.
So will not affect it, is it?
No more than anything else is affected. Yeah, there's problems are the same. Yes, and I think as the other point Bron raised, that this will probably be a spec that will have a JS calendar section added to it, because by the time this comes out, JS calendar will be a done deal.
You mean another 10 years, or?
Please.
By Christmas.
Christmas.
It says October 2021 in the milestones, but anyway. All right. And that's all that I've got slides for. The rest was the milestone review and other business. So do we have any other business while I find the milestones? I guess not. So Daniel already updated these, which makes me think there's probably very little for us to do. Except we may be doing iCalendar series later and submitting subscription update and relations earlier. They've both been dumped to June when they're going to happen right now or very soon from now. Scheduling controls, yes, that's on me. I'll get back to that. I didn't even want to talk about it this time around. I think they'll look all right.
It's not because it's June that we can't do that in April.
Yep. It'd be nice to hit a milestone early for once. All right. And after all of that, we have a couple of minutes left at the end. So it just shows how bad I was at predicting the amount of time we would need for each topic. So the next CalConnect is also at a very inconvenient time for Australians, unfortunately. It's going to be even later in the night. So it's going to start, I think, 1 a.m. and finish 6 a.m. or something crazy like that each day. So that's going to be kind of hard. So hopefully we can discuss some of this via email.
Yeah.
Well, we do have the Thursday where we could shift. We could have some calls at a different time.
So we might be able to fit these drafts into those. If we can grab the happy-ish time, which
There's
not
no
so happy for
time.
Robert, unfortunately.
There's no happy time if there's Europeans
It's late
as
at
well.
night for Robert. Yeah. Well, I mean, we can go earlier in the Australian morning. If we did it at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., that's still much less obnoxious than 3 a.m.
Yes.
and it's not too late yet for Europe. All right, let's do an interim. I guess during CalConnect, then we'll find the time that works best for everybody, and put a Calext interim in CalConnect again, and then we can cover these topics there.
Cool. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks everybody. Let's enjoy our 5 extra minutes. Gren, hello. You popped into the speaker list, but I can't
If
hear
you're
you.
speaking, you're unmute.
Maybe accidental.
And go on again. Anything in Jabber? Nope.
I'll just say thanks to Barry for all his work over the last few years.
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Barry.
Yeah. Does that mean you're available to be chair of working groups again, Barry? Is that how it works? All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.